In 1990, Cadillac built a passenger sedan longer than a full-size pickup truck, not a limousine, not a stretch conversion. A production sedan you could walk into a dealership and buy. That was not a design flourish. That was a statement about what luxury was supposed to be. In 1996, GM stopped building it, and with it ended 60 years of body-on-frame American luxury. The market moved on to European sport luxury and the SUV. Was that trade actually worth making? To answer that, you have to go back to the car itself, not what it looked like, what it was actually built to be, and why that mattered. The Fleetwood Brougham was not built to compete on performance numbers or feature lists. It was built around a single idea, and that idea ran from the frame up through every system in the car. The car sat on something called the D-body platform, a separate steel ladder frame, two longitudinal rails running the length of the car, and connected by cross members, supported the body, which was mounted on top on rubber body mounts. This was body-on-frame construction. It was the kind of architecture American automakers had used since before World War II. It shared that platform with the Buick Roadmaster and the Chevrolet Caprice. All three were assembled simultaneously at General Motors' Arlington assembly plant in Arlington, Texas, rolling off the same production lines. A luxury flagship, a family sedan, and a police interceptor, all built on the same floor from the same frame components. That tells you something about how General Motors thought about scale. The standard Fleetwood Brougham had a wheelbase of 134 inches. To put that in terms that land a little differently, a standard cab short bed Chevrolet Silverado pickup has a wheelbase of approximately 119 inches. The Fleetwood was longer than a half-ton truck, and it was a passenger sedan. The extended wheelbase version, the d'Elegance, stretched to 144 inches. That exceeds the current Chevrolet Suburban. That was not accidental, it was the point. The rubber body mounts between the frame and the body were the core of the car's philosophy. Their job was to act as an isolation layer, absorbing vibration before it reached the cabin. The frame could transmit road harshness, the engine could produce vibration, and the body would not feel much of it. Over time, those mounts harden and lose their damping character, and the car starts to feel its age. Replace them, and the isolation returns. But in their prime, they were doing exactly what they were designed to do. The platform served three distinct buyer groups. The first was the traditional luxury sedan buyer, the customer who had been purchasing full-size American cars for decades and had no interest in changing the format. The second was the fleet and livery market, buyers who needed the chassis durability and load capacity for professional use. The third was the commercial chassis market, coach builders who converted the D-body frame into hearses and funeral coaches. Without all three segments, the economics of building the platform would not have worked. The Fleetwood was the luxury expression at the top of that structure, but it needed the others beneath it. The car's curb weight ran around 4,500 pounds. That was not a deficiency in the design. The mass was in the frame, and the frame was built to commercial chassis standards. Surviving D-body frames from dry climate cars show minimal structural degradation at 30 years. The engineers were building something they expected to last, and period road tests confirmed the result. Car and Driver and Motor Trend both noted the Fleetwood Brougham's ride quality as genuinely among the best available in any production vehicle. The long wheelbase, the body-on-frame isolation, and the soft suspension calibration produced something that moved through the road rather than responding to it. That was the engineering target. They hit it. What they did not anticipate was the market asking a completely different question. The ladder frame at the heart of the D-body wasn't a compromise, it was a statement. By 1990, most of the automotive world had moved toward unibody construction, where the body and the structural frame are a single welded unit, lighter, more rigid, better for handling. European luxury manufacturers had built their entire identity around that approach. The D-body went the other direction deliberately. The separate steel frame added mass, added complexity, and required more material. General Motors engineers knew all of that. They built it anyway because the frame's mass was doing a specific job that a lighter structure couldn't replicate. A heavy perimeter frame has a natural resistance to deflection. When a wheel drops into a road imperfection, the frame absorbs the energy across its full length before any of it reaches the body above. The longer the frame, the more distance that energy travels. At 134 inches of wheelbase, the Fleetwood had a lot of distance to work with. The result wasn't a car that responded to bumps. It was a car that absorbed them and continued on as if they hadn't happened. The engine in the early cars matched that philosophy exactly. From 1990 through 1993, the Fleetwood ran the 5.7-liter L0558, a throttle-body fuel-injected version of General Motors' small block in full iron block and iron head configuration, producing approximately 180 horsepower. Those numbers don't sound dramatic today. That wasn't the point. Iron heads and an iron block provide thermal mass and dimensional stability that aluminum cannot match. The engine ran smoothly across a wide revolutions per minute range without strain, and it did so without introducing the mechanical harshness that a more highly tuned engine would have brought into the cabin. The L05 was calibrated for effortless power delivery, not peak output. It fit the car's purpose completely. The steering amplified that character. The Fleetwood used hydraulic-assisted recirculating ball steering, not the rack and pinion geometry found in European contemporaries and in General Motors' own front-wheel drive products. Recirculating ball steering translates steering wheel rotation into wheel angle through a worm gear and a series of ball bearings, with hydraulic pressure reducing the physical effort to near zero. The consequence of near-zero effort is near-zero feedback. The driver receives essentially no tactile information about what the front wheels are doing, no sensation of surface texture, no indication of adhesion limit. That was designed in, not designed out. The car's steering was tuned for silence at the hands, not for communication. Period testers documented this precisely. The Fleetwood's handling was described as predictably vague. That characterization was accurate, and it was also beside the point, because vagueness at the wheel was the intended behavior. The buyer this car was built for didn't want to feel the road. They wanted not to feel the road. The engineering delivered that outcome consistently. The rear suspension reinforced the same priority: a solid live rear axle on coil springs, located by a 4-link geometry, simpler than an independent rear setup, fewer wear points, fewer compliance variables, more consistent load bearing under the weight of a full-size sedan and its passengers. For the commercial chassis application, a rigid rear axle was a requirement. For the luxury sedan, it contributed to the same compliance character as the frame. The whole car was built around one idea, from the frame to the steering to the axle, and that idea was insulation. What the engineers built in Arlington was a machine that existed to separate its occupants from the physical world outside it. Refinement, in their definition, meant the absence of sensation. The road happened beneath the car. The passengers simply didn't need to know about it. That definition worked for 60 years. Then 1990 arrived, and somebody changed the definition. In September of 1989, Lexus delivered the LS400 to its first American customers. The price was $35,000. The car was front-engine, rear-wheel drive, and built on a unibody platform with an all-aluminum double-overhead cam V8, producing 250 horsepower. It was whisper-quiet. It handled with precision. It offered the kind of technological refinement that American luxury manufacturers had not prioritized because, until that moment, they had not needed to. The LS400 did not just compete with the Fleetwood, it redefined what the word refinement was allowed to mean. Lexus built a car that was quiet in a completely different way from the Fleetwood. Where the D-body achieved silence through mass and isolation, the LS400 achieved it through engineering precision, tight tolerances, carefully managed resonance frequencies, a body structure designed to suppress vibration at the source rather than absorb it after the fact. The result felt effortless in a way that the Fleetwood's buyers recognized, but the method was entirely different. and the handling was in another category entirely. Then, in 1991, Mercedes-Benz introduced the S-Class 40. This was a different kind of statement. The 40 was large, heavy, and expensive, starting well above $60,000. It used double pane glass to reduce wind noise. It had a closing assist mechanism on the doors, so they shut with a specific weighted precision. Every system in the car communicated engineering investment that went beyond function into deliberate sensory design. The W140 did not compete with the Fleetwood on price. It competed on the definition of what a luxury car was supposed to communicate about its manufacturer. The Fleetwood sat between these two forces. It sat above the Lincoln Town Car, which fought for the same domestic buyer with the same body-on-frame format and the same pushrod V8 logic. It sat well below the Mercedes on price. It was roughly level with the Lexus on cost, but not on the qualities the market was beginning to reward. General Motors read the competitive landscape clearly enough. The North Star program, the front-wheel drive Cadillacs with double overhead Cam V8 engines, was the company's answer to the import threat. The DeVille, the Eldorado, and the front-wheel drive Fleetwood were all part of that answer. General Motors was investing in the technology that could meet Lexus and Mercedes on their own terms, with a modern platform and a sophisticated powertrain. The D-body rear-wheel drive Fleetwood was not part of that investment. Its platform costs were fully amortized. It required no new engineering, only updates. It generated margin without consuming development budget. So it continued, positioned for the buyer who specifically wanted what it was, while the rest of the Cadillac line moved in a different direction. The pricing structure told that story plainly. The Fleetwood Brougham opened at around $32,000 in 1990 and reached roughly $37,000 by 1996. The town car ran just below it throughout the same period. The Lexus overlapped it. The Mercedes was in a different conversation entirely, but price was not the core issue. The core issue was that the market was beginning to associate performance with refinement. The old definition, isolation from the road, was starting to feel like absence. The new definition, control over the road, was starting to feel like sophistication. Those are two genuinely different philosophies, and they produce genuinely different cars. General Motors knew which direction the market was moving. The question was what to do with the car it still had on the line in Arlington. The answer for a while was to make it faster. For 1994, General Motors gave the Fleetwood a new engine. The L05 was retired. In its place came the LT1, a revised 5.7-liter V8, producing approximately 260 horsepower from the same displacement class. That's a 44% increase in output through architecture revision alone, without growing the engine. The LT1 was a thorough rethinking of the small block architecture. Iron block, aluminum heads, sequential port fuel injection, and one decision that separated it from every small block before it. The cooling system ran backward. Coolant entered the heads first, cooling the combustion chambers before moving down into the block. That kept the hottest part of the engine coolest, reducing detonation and extracting more efficiency from the same displacement. The reverse flow layout had a consequence. The OptiSpark distributor, an optical ignition system more precise than any contact-based design it replaced, was mounted at the front of the engine directly below the water pump. When the pump aged and began seeping coolant, which is a normal failure mode on any engine, the coolant dripped straight onto the OptiSpark housing. Infiltration degraded the sensors and eventually killed ignition entirely. The failure is documented across every LT1 application because it is not vehicle-specific. It is a packaging decision. The repair is straightforward when done completely. Replace the water pump and the OptiSpark together, and the failure sequence does not recur. The LT1's reputation for unreliability traces almost entirely to cars where only one component was replaced and the failure returned. What the LT1 gave the Fleetwood was something it had not had before: genuine performance credibility. 260 horsepower in a body-on-frame luxury sedan was not a performance car claim, but it was enough to make the car feel effortless at highway speeds in a way the L05 never quite managed. The engine had reserve, it did not strain. And it shared its transmission, the 4LOXDE 4-speed automatic, with the Corvette, the Camaro, and the Silverado pickup. parts priced for the truck market, rebuild knowledge drawn from the performance car community. The Fleetwood service ecosystem quietly became one of the most practical of any luxury car on the market. The LT1 was the Fleetwood's best version. It arrived in 1994. The platform had 2 years left. The LT1 made the Fleetwood faster. It didn't make the Fleetwood relevant to the buyer who was leaving. That buyer wasn't walking into a Lincoln showroom instead. They weren't cross-shopping the Roadmaster. They were buying something with four-wheel drive, a raised ride height, and a tailgate. The full-size SUV segment had been building through the early 1990s, and by the middle of the decade, it had become the dominant format for the American buyer who wanted a large V8-powered vehicle. The Chevrolet Tahoe and the GMC Yukon absorbed that buyer almost completely. Body-on-frame construction, a live rear axle, a big block V8, and more cargo utility than any sedan could offer. The D-Body's traditional buyer wasn't abandoning the format they had loved. They were choosing a version of it that carried more groceries and felt more current. The buyer who wanted size, body-on-frame construction, and a pushrod V8 now had a truck-based alternative the culture had decided was the modern expression of those values. The sedan version of the same idea started to feel like a remnant rather than a choice. The D-Body's platform costs had been paid off long before. Continuing the Fleetwood required updates, not reinvention, and the margin it generated helped fund the North Star program. The commercial chassis market, coach builders converting D-Body frames into hearses and professional vehicles, kept the production economics viable even as private buyer numbers fell. The platform wasn't dying from market failure, it was being retired from strategic direction. The buyers who remained loyal were real, and their preference was genuine, but they were a shrinking group, and the culture around them had stopped reinforcing that preference. A long wheelbase body on frame sedan no longer read as an obvious choice. It read as a deliberate decision to hold on to something the mainstream had left behind. The Lexus hadn't built a better Fleetwood. The SUV hadn't built a better Fleetwood. What they had done was make the question the Fleetwood was answering feel like the wrong question. And once that happens, there is no engineering response that fixes it. By 1996, General Motors had made the decision, and it ended more than one model. On a single day in 1996, General Motors ended its entire North American rear-wheel drive passenger car program. Not one model, all of them. The Cadillac Fleetwood, the Buick Roadmaster, and the Chevrolet Caprice all stopped production simultaneously at Arlington. The same plant that had built all three on the same floor, from the same frame components, went quiet on the same schedule. There was no phase transition, no successor waiting on the line beside them, just a full stop. To understand what that meant, you have to trace the line backward. Cadillac had been building body-on-frame full-size luxury sedans continuously since the 1930s. Through the post-war boom, when American luxury cars grew to dimensions that still seem improbable today. Through the fuel crisis of the 1970s, when the platform was downsized under government pressure, but the construction philosophy held. Through the 80s, when front-wheel drive began taking over the luxury segment, and General Motors converted most of its Cadillac lineup to the new architecture while keeping the D-Body running for the buyer who would not follow. 60 years of unbroken production. The same fundamental idea, refined across generations, maintained through every disruption the industry had thrown at it. The 1996 Fleetwood was not the end of a model. It was the end of the argument the model had been making for 6 decades. The naming situation in those final years carried a kind of quiet symbolism. From 1993 through 1996, General Motors sold 2 completely unrelated cars under the Fleetwood name simultaneously. One was the D-Body, rear-wheel drive, body-on-frame, pushrod V8, the car this story is about. The other was a front-wheel drive unibody sedan, powered by the North Star DOHC V8, the technological direction General Motors had chosen for Cadillac's future. Same name, different platform, different engine, different construction philosophy entirely. Parts, service procedures, and specifications were entirely separate. A customer who walked into a Cadillac dealer and asked for a Fleetwood had to specify which one they meant. That naming overlap was not an accident of bureaucracy. It was a visible expression of General Motors managing a transition. One Fleetwood pointed backward, one pointed forward. For 3 years they existed side by side, and then the one pointing backward was discontinued, and the name went with the other. The commercial chassis program kept the D-Body's parts ecosystem alive, beyond the retail model's end. After 1996, General Motors continued supplying the bare D-Body frame and drivetrain to coach builders producing hearses and professional vehicles. That supply continued into the early 2000s. The same commercial chassis requirement, the market segment that had helped justify the platform's continuation through the declining retail years, ultimately extended parts production for D-Body components well past the date the public could buy a new one. Every Fleetwood owner who sources an original equipment part today is quietly benefiting from the hearse industry's demand, from a production window that would have closed years earlier if the retail car had been the only reason to keep the tooling running. The gap that followed was 7 years long. General Motors did not produce a rear-wheel drive passenger car in North America between the 1996 Fleetwood and the 2003 Cadillac CTS. When the CTS arrived, it used the Sigma platform, a rear-wheel drive unibody architecture, modern, rigid, and properly sorted for handling in the European tradition. It was a genuine return to rear-wheel drive in every meaningful engineering sense, but not a return to body-on-frame. No Cadillac built after 1996 uses a separate ladder frame. The construction philosophy that defined American luxury transportation for 60 years was not set aside to be revisited later. It was retired. The 2003 CTS proved that Cadillac could build a rear-wheel drive car that competed with BMW and Mercedes on their own terms. What it did not do, and did not try to do, was move through the road the way the Fleetwood had. That was not a failure of ambition. It was a different ambition entirely. The line from the 1930s to 1996 was real, and it was continuous. And in 1996, it ended completely. What came after was built for a different definition of what a Cadillac was supposed to be. What the Fleetwood left behind was not nostalgia, it was infrastructure. The 4L60E transmission did not stop being manufactured when the Fleetwood did. It kept going in the Silverado, the Suburban, the Tahoe, and the Camaro for years after Arlington went quiet. The combined production volume of all those applications created a parts ecosystem that no single luxury sedan could have sustained independently. A Fleetwood owner sourcing a rebuild kit today is drawing on the full-size pickup truck's parts demand, one of the highest volume automotive aftermarket categories in North America. The transmission was priced for the truck market when the Fleetwood was new, and it still is. That is an accident of platform sharing that happened to benefit every person who still drives one. The LT1 engine has the same story. The OptiSpark failure, and its repair procedure are thoroughly documented through the Corvette and Camaro communities, which followed the engine's performance applications with far more intensity than the luxury sedan community ever generated. A Fleetwood owner who searches for LT1 maintenance documentation finds a body of knowledge built by people who were interested in the Impala S and the Z28, not the Brougham. The Chevrolet Impala S used the same D-Body platform and the same LT1 engine, and its enthusiast community produced more technical documentation than the Fleetwoods ever did. That documentation applies directly, without modification. The knowledge does not care which badge is on the grille. The frames in dry climate cars are holding. Surviving D-Body examples from non-salt belt environments show minimal structural degradation at 30 years, which confirms what the engineers built the frame to do. The steel gauge and the rubber body mount isolation from road shock were designed for commercial chassis loads, and they have proven durable at that standard. In salt belt climates, the story is different, with frame rail corrosion ahead of the rear wheels being the primary structural concern on any pre-purchase inspection. But in the right environment, the frame the Arlington plant produced is still doing exactly what it was built for. The extended wheelbase d'elegance, with its dual trunk antennas for rear seat communication equipment, was built for someone who conducted business from the back seat. Those cars still carry that identity. The dual antenna arrangement is visible from across a parking lot, and it reads the same way it did in 1990, as a marker for a buyer who expected the world to come to them rather than the other way around. The Fleetwood was the last American car engineered explicitly around the idea that the road was something to be kept out rather than engaged with. That philosophy did not survive 1996. Nothing built since has tried to replicate it, because the market that valued it has never come back large enough to justify the attempt. When the Arlington plant went quiet in 1996, it was not just a production line shutting down. It was the end of a specific idea, that a car could be a destination in itself, that 134 inches of steel and rubber and iron could exist purely to separate you from the world outside the glass, not to haul, not to perform, just to carry you. The market did not reject that idea because it was wrong. It rejected it because the culture had decided that utility was the new luxury, that doing things was worth more than simply going somewhere. The SUV offered four-wheel drive, a raised seat, and a tailgate. And that combination told a story about the owner that a long, low sedan no longer could. So, the Fleetwood did not lose to a better version of itself. It lost to a different question entirely. What is worth remembering is what that silence in Arlington actually cost. We lost the last car built on the belief that the road was something to be kept out. Everything that came after was built to engage it, and that is a trade the market made willingly and permanently. Next time, we follow the Cadillac badge as it moves from the trunk lid to the tailgate, and look at what happened when America's oldest luxury nameplate decided that utility was the future. If you remember the Fleetwood, let us know your favorite detail in the comments below. Now, click on this next video if you want to know about the last great Mercedes. It was a car so over-engineered it made Lexus nervous, until the accountants replaced it with one of the most problem-filled cars they ever made.